Hi, I'm Susanna and this is my January and February reading wrap-up. I finished only one novel in January, so I decided to combine these 2 months. Let's start with the novel I finished in January. That was Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. This is science fiction. Ryland Grace wakes up from coma on board of a spaceship and finds out his other crewmates have died during the voyage to a different solar system. As his memory slowly comes back, he realizes he's on a desperate mission to save the Earth from star-eating microbes. And he has to do it alone. Or does he? I had previously seen the movie version of The Martian, which is based on Weir's debut novel, but I had never read his books before. Science fiction can get technical and difficult to understand, but Weir's writing is easily accessible. You can follow the plot of this novel without deep knowledge of astrophysics and microbiology. This was a fun, banter-filled ride. Ryland makes first contact with another alien species suffering from the same problem, and together with his new alien buddy Rocky, he has to save their respective solar systems. I especially loved how the 2 characters learn to communicate in their very different languages. That was the part where the book turned from good to awesome. Which isn't surprising considering that my favorite sci-fi movie is Arrival, another story about humans learning to communicate with aliens. There was a lot going on in this book, but it still felt rather slow-paced. I think there were 3 reasons for it. First, the book is quite long. Secondly, there is a lot of scientific language that slowed down my reading pace. And thirdly, it took Ryland a long time to start working on his main mission, aka saving the world. Ryland needed to first regain his memory, arrived at his destination, and meet and learned how to communicate with Rocky. It took 2/3 of the book before the characters began solving the problem and figuring out how to get rid of the astrophage infestation. But as the events were so interesting, I didn't find the slow pacing a huge problem. I have to say that the characters in this book are rather one-dimensional. If you're looking for a book that has fully developed 3-dimensional characters and character development and is overall more character-driven than plot-driven, you probably won't enjoy this book much. Also, if you hate math, this book probably isn't for you. But if you want fun sci-fi adventure where the hero saves the Earth and possibly more, I think you'll love this. I gave it 5 stars. The next books I finished in January and February is a young adult fantasy series Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. As I'm reviewing the entire series in this video, beware of potential spoilers. Let's start with the first book in the trilogy, Once Upon a Broken Heart. Evangeline Fox has always believed in happily ever after, but then the love of her life chooses to marry someone else. Desperate to stop the wedding, she strikes a deal with Jax, an immortal fate known as the Prince of Hearts. In exchange, he wants her to give 3 kisses to 3 people of his choosing. Evangeline agrees, but after the first kiss, she learns that Jax wants more from her than she is willing to give. This series is set in the same world as Garber's Caraval trilogy, which I read last year. For some reason I expected this to be a prequel to Caraval, but I must have misread some review. It's actually a sequel, and events take place immediately after the end of the last book of Caraval trilogy finale. Nevertheless, you can easily follow the plot of this series even if you haven't read Caraval trilogy. Although it's easier to understand some aspects of the world building if you're familiar with the world and some of the recurring characters. Garber's writing style leans heavily into imagery. Especially smells and tastes are at times described in ways that don't quite make sense. For example, forest green cakes that tasted like luck and love, or darkness that smelled of tears and tulle. While reading Caraval, I found the writing style somewhat distracting. But either this book didn't lean quite so heavily into weird imagery, or I had gotten used to the style because I didn't find it as distracting as a year ago. In any case, I can easily see that Garber's writing style might not be for everyone. If you read Caraval and loved the writing style, you probably enjoy this book as well, and vice versa. The biggest problem with this book I had was with the plot. Evangeline heads to the magnificent north to heal her broken heart and to find true love, but she might actually be heading there because Jax needs her to be there to fulfill a prophecy and open a mysterious Valerie Arch, which hides a treasure or secrets or monsters. No one knows. Because of all the various plots and subplots, I wasn't sure where this book was heading until well after the midpoint. A lot happens and the story has a nice fast pace, but as this book has clearly been designed to be the first book in a trilogy, it doesn't feel like a complete story. The story itself doesn't offer many surprises. Evangeline's and Jax's relationship progresses slowly but steadily from enemies to friends, potentially lovers. There is a hint of a love triangle, although it's not certain any of the characters truly loves the others. Evangeline is a typical feisty YA heroine, but she is also a very trusting and naive character who often makes questionable decisions. Your mileage may vary whether you find her endearing or frustrating. And Jax. I've said it before and I say it again, I'm not a fan of morally grey love interests. But if that's your thing, you probably enjoyed this book a lot more than I did. I still rather enjoyed this book and I was curious to see how the trilogy continued. I gave this book 4 stars. If you like young adult fantasy with fairy tale-esque world building, vivid imagery, ancient curses and prophecies, and pretty dresses and morally grey love interests, you might enjoy this series. The second book in the trilogy is The Ballad of Never After. After Evangeline Fox learns that her husband Apollo is still alive, she swears she will save him, and without the help of Jax, the Prince of Hearts, who has betrayed her. But when Apollo wakes up from its magical sleep and tries to kill her, Evangeline has to turn to Jax again and ask for his help. To break the murder curse, she agrees to collect the missing stones to open the mysterious Valerie Arch. The Ballad of Never After picks up right after the end of the first book. I found the plot of this installment a lot more interesting. We finally get some action instead of all the setup of the first book. However, the action is stalled in several places in favor of the romance plot. There is a lot of pining and uncertainty as Evangeline fights against her feelings for Jax. Evangeline has some character development, but for the most part she is still very trusting and naive. Jax's behavior toward Evangeline, however, was manipulative and toxic. If that's the type of love interest you want to read about, you might enjoy the romance plot. I did not. I also did not like the "my love can save him" trope. Just no. I seriously was hoping that the last book in the trilogy would subvert that trope. In terms of writing style, I think The Ballad of Never After shows a progression in Garber's writing. She still describes smells and tastes in a distinctive way, but not to the same extent as in her previous novels. One thing in the writing and plotting of this book I did not like was how convenient some of the events were. Every time Evangeline was in trouble, you could be sure that Jax would burst in out of nowhere and save her. You would think that after so many times it happened in this book, Evangeline would have learned her lesson and not trusted people so easily. I don't want to spoil the ending of this book, but I do want to say that I wasn't particularly keen on the trope that it used. But I was willing to give the last book a chance. Because of Jax's behavior and the novel prioritizing romance over plot, I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars. And finally, the last book in the trilogy, A Curse for True Love. Evangeline Fox seems to have found her happily ever after. She is married to a handsome, devoted prince. But there is a huge problem. Evangeline doesn't remember how she ended up married to the prince or who stole her memories. And worse, it seems her husband is determined to make sure she never finds out. But before they can have their happy ending, he must kill Jax, the Prince of Hearts. This was a fast-paced and action-packed ending to the series, but I found myself wanting something more. Like I mentioned earlier, there were 2 tropes that I didn't particularly like in The Ballad of Never After. And for that, I need to spoil the ending of the second book, so if you haven't read that, beware. The second book ended with a memory loss trope. As it turns out, the memory loss was almost unnecessary considering how easily Evangeline gets her memories back. My second issue was the "my love can save him" trope. It wasn't subverted to the extent I would have preferred, but at least Evangeline understood that Jax needed to give love a chance as well. My biggest problem throughout this entire series was that there were too many plot lines. Many of the side plots were abandoned and a lot of the characters simply disappeared. For example, what happened to Evangeline's first love, her stepsister, or Apollo's brother. There were so many plots and side plots that I wasn't sure what the main plotline was supposed to be. Is it the Valerie Arch and the question of what happened to Valors, the founders of the kingdom? If so, the plot often takes backseat in order to focus on romance, and I wasn't sure what the message of the Valerie plot was supposed to be. Or is the main plot Evangeline's and Jax's love story? If so, I would expect the main couple to learn and change more. Jax seems to have the most to learn and is the character who should experience the biggest change. But we never experience his character development. Not even when some of the chapters in this last book are written from his point of view. I would have wanted even a tiny glimpse of him realizing that he can have love and doesn't have to drive Evangeline away. Evangeline herself doesn't change at all. In the beginning of the trilogy, she believes in fairy tales, happily ever afters, and that every story can have multiple endings. In the end of A Curse for True Love, she still believes those things. She is fundamentally the same trusting and optimistic person throughout the trilogy. If you loved the first 2 books, you'll probably enjoy A Curse for True Love as well. It offers a satisfactory ending to Evangeline's story. But because of lack of character development and clear focus on what the story was about, I'm giving this book 3.5 stars as well. In January, I also finished Tunski, which is a heartwarming memoir written from the point of view of a Samoyed dog. And in January and February, I also finished 3 of my old high school textbooks. 2 of these were biology textbooks and 1 of them was geography. And then it's time for my March hopefuls. I want to finish 2 novels and start a 3rd one. I'm already in the middle of Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist. I also want to finish Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross and start the 2nd book in the duology Ruthless Vows. I still have 2 of my old high school textbooks remaining. They are both about language and literature. And after that, I want to start this massive psychology handbook. This is also a reread. I read this book for the first time about 25 years ago. Those were the books I read in January and February and my goals for March. Let me know what your favorite book so far has been this year, and I'll see you in my next video.